Just make sure. There we go. All right. All right, so we're talking about the Pentateuch today, the first 5 books of the Jewish scriptures, and really the heart, just as the Gospels are the heart of the scriptures for Christians, the Pentateuch, the Torah, is the heart of the Bible for Jews. Okay, remember the Samaritans don't even have any extra books, right? They just accept the Pentateuch and that's it. They don't accept the prophets, they don't accept the histories, they don't nothing. The wisdom literature, nothing. So they show like a more ancient, the more ancient form of the Jewish Bible as it developed, because the Pentateuch developed first because it was so important to Jewish life and history. So the creation of the Hebrew Bible are 3 things that we want to look at. We want to look at experience, reflection, and articulation. Articulation, right? And this occurs, I think, with any kind of writings. It's not unique to the Bible, okay? You have an event, you have something that happens, so you have an experience. You think about the experience, and then you try to tell it to others. You tell it to others, you know? I went to a Taylor Swift concert. Why did she dress that way after the 3rd song? So I reflect on my experience. You know, I don't know what she wears, but anyways, I know they wear different outfits, right? They come out in different outfits. Why did she do that? That was kind of goofy. And then I tell my friends, you know, I send them a text, you know, so we have experience, we have reflection, we have articulation. What is experience? The state, because you know I like making definitions. So to be specific, the state or quality of having knowledge engages the intellect based on someone's observation of something or participation in something. You see something happen, or you actually are directly part of something happening. That's an experience. Okay? I experienced a car accident. I could experience it by watching it, looking at it from my car as I see someone plow into somebody else. Or I could directly participate in it if I'm not looking and I also plow into the person who plowed into somebody else. But it's all an experience. And it's knowledge. I have knowledge. It creates concepts and memory in my mind. Okay? It's in my mind, in my intellect. And it comes from the Latin word experior, which means to prove something, put it to the test, to try to do something. Okay, so to prove or put to the test. What kind of chips are those again, Mr. O'Neill? Huh? What? Oh, goldfish. Sorry, sir. Sorry to yell at you. I couldn't really. Okay, goldfish. Well, that's nice. Cheese flavored or? Interesting. What is reflection then? Our second aspect. It's thinking about one's mental or actual experience. Reflection. Again, engaging the intellect. It's thought. You are throwing your mind back on your thoughts or your experience. So reflecto, to bend or bring back. Okay, to bend or bring back. Apparently that's a medical term as I was doing my research, you know, when those of you who are in the medical field or going into it, you know, when they talk about, they cut open the body and they reflect the fascia, I think was the example used, or I don't know what the fascia is. Is that something under the skin or something? Holds them up? I don't know. Thank you, nursing students. Well, I don't know, maybe you're doing radiology, but still you learn this. You know, you reflect, which means you peel back the piece of skin or whatever, and it's reflected. All right, it's coming from the Latin word to bend or bend back. So you're bending back your mind on an experience that you've had and thinking about it, reflecting. And then you articulate, to say or express something clearly. Okay, so you're saying something clearly. Articulo, the verb in Latin, to put into separate parts, basically, into small bits. And that's articulated, breaking it down, as we say, articulo, to break something down, basically. And that makes it easier to understand than when it's not put into separate parts. So, I studied philosophy as an undergrad because, I wanted to be a priest. Certainly wasn't going to get me any jobs, right, Ms. Wemrick? Anyways, and one of the worst things, there's some philosophers you hate and some you love. I always loved like Plato, the Greek, and Socrates because they articulated. They could be difficult at times to read, but usually it was conversational and the thoughts were short, something I could understand and I could follow. But then you get to other philosophers who think that being a philosopher, an intellectual, means writing very long sentences, like sentences that are like a paragraph long, and using words in odd, eccentric ways. So it's very hard, for me at least, to follow the thought. And to me, for me, that's just a giveaway that someone has nothing to say, really. I just don't have time for it. Some do. Some philosophers are important and they write that way, but some of them, it's just like they think they're using a lot of words. They're not articulating. They're not expressing themselves clearly, and they don't want to because they want you to think that they're bright. They're intelligent, I guess. They make their language mysterious. So God gives experiences to people, to human beings. Okay? Not just the Jews. I would say that, God gives experiences to all of us. We all have some kind of experience of, the source of our existence. And people do reflect on that, and those reflections, and they articulate it. They tell stories about it. Jews were no different. And so God spoke through the events in the Jews' life. This was something that maybe was more different from other religions because, when you read the Bible, it's very focused on events. That's why it's so easy for people to think that it's a history, and read it all like history when it's not all like history. Because even things that are mythical are kind of set in a historical mold in the story of as the telling of an event that happened when they're maybe just trying to tell a story, like say the book of Jonah, the prophet Jonah, who is a prophet and he's the guy who's swallowed up by the large fish, maybe a whale, and for 3 days he's in the belly of a whale until he's spat out on the seashore, and other things happen to him. But that probably didn't happen to him because that just doesn't happen. Whales don't eat people. They don't eat people, and then you can't really survive in the intestinal tract or stomach of a whale for 3 days. I would imagine. I've never been there. I've never tested it out, Mr. Kettner, but it doesn't seem plausible. But just because it's written like it actually happened, like it's a historical event, but it's actually trying to tell. It has a message. But you also want to be careful that you don't miss the things that are being told as historical events that probably did happen. Because the Jews saw God speaking through actions in history. So Israel, the Israelite religion was very different because it was an historical religion, as differentiated from the surrounding religions and most religions in the world, which are not historical. Okay? What's history? It's the art, the practice of investigating, looking into, and describing accurately an event as it really and actually happened. Okay? And history, it just means story from Greeks. Okay? They're telling stories. Hey, you might say to me, well, but Dr. Dunn, haven't you said that not everything is really describing things as they really and actually happen? They don't intend to. Yeah, but some are in the Bible. And certainly, I think the main events that they're claiming did happen, and they want people to believe that they happened, even at times when they describe things in mythological language. Like the Jews actually did believe it was an historical event that God created everything. But how they tell that and describe that in two different stories in the book of Genesis, that's up to the writer. Okay? And the writer might actually have believed that the story was historical, if you look at the literal sense. The person might have believed that it was 6 actual days that God created everything, and then God actually did rest on the 7th day. It's not symbolism for the author. Or that God made a garden somewhere in the Middle East where he put a man and a woman. And that's historical. It's meant to be the author really believed that there was a location like the Garden of Eden. That's possible, okay. I don't think there was, but but I think the person may have believed that because they had that historical view that God actually did things really and actually in history. Okay, but we don't want to confuse. You don't want to confuse. You don't want to confuse the stories. You have to take each story for its own value. Some are clearly describing. You have to ask: is this trying to describe an event as it really and truly happened, or can it be read in some other way? Because God might not intend it that way. Remember, there are two authors here. The human author might take a very literal view of what he's writing. But God might be like, okay, I know that's not how it really happened, all right? But they're not going to understand the Big Bang or the formation of the cosmos. So if a person needs to describe it in terms of days or a garden in somewhere in the desert, okay, fine. I'll go with that. Because then I can work with that, because then as there's development in the human understanding in the mind, God can then reveal more to us about how things are. And it's still telling us truth. The surrounding religions of the Jews were different. They weren't really historical religions or concerned more with history or how things really were or actually were. They were more nature religions. So they tell stories about what they saw in nature. They wanted to know, why do clouds form in the sky? Or why, what's the purpose of the sky? Or how, why do birds fly up in the sky? Why are there natural disasters like volcanoes and earthquakes? Where do you go when you die? When we bury people, where do they go? Underground, when we put them underground. So they were concerned, those weren't really historical events per se in their lives. The gods didn't necessarily work in their lives. Okay, they were just observing the natural world and then making stories about it and trying to explain it. And the Jews do that sometimes as well. But the difference for the Jews was that their God actually worked in their history and in their lives. Okay? Whereas in the nature religions, the gods just kind of do their own thing and don't really have much of a relationship with human beings. Unless the human beings get in the way. So for the Jewish religion, the question was, what did God want for his people? What was he asking of them? And he manifested that usually in events that happened to them. And so the Jews would ask, where is God working in this event? Where is he showing himself or revealing himself in something that happened to them, good or bad? So the event itself was seen as important. So historical events like the creation of the cosmos, this man Abram who decides to just move from southern Iraq and move over to Palestine, to Canaan, okay? The establishment of a monarchy. All right, but these things might just have happened naturally. People moved around and migrated. The Jews migrated out of Egypt at one time and back into Canaan, and Abram migrated, and they chose a king at one time. There were battles and fights, and the kingdoms got invaded. These might, just from a historical perspective, be just events that happened, but not for the Jews. That God was working in those events. He was telling them something. And so you have what are called, and this was a phrase from one of my professors, Arthur Saratelli, give him a little shout out and respect, a little representation here. He was bishop of the Diocese of Paterson, New Jersey, but now he's retired. God bless him. He was my professor. I knew him when he was just a simple priest. And then he's a bishop. Yeah. I met him one day. He didn't remember me. But he was a biblical scholar. He studied scripture in Rome. Got his degree from the Pontifical Biblical Institute in Rome. And he called these people inspired reflectors. Inspired reflectors, the people who wrote down these stories. They reflected in an inspired way on the message God was trying to convey by whatever happened to them as a community. What they thought was important. Because they didn't tell us the whole story, just like with the Gospels. The followers of Jesus didn't tell us everything that Jesus said and did. They told us the stuff that they thought was important. And the same thing in the Bible. And they interpreted the event. So as they're receiving the story, they're then passing it on to you with their interpretation, tradition. They're handing it on to you. And we talked about sacred tradition before. So you're never just receiving the event unfiltered. Okay? They got it from somebody else, and then they're passing it on to you. Then the church has to interpret it, and that's why we have levels of interpretation that we talked about. Whoops. An event. So God reveals himself through events. And what is an event? It's the word we use for something that has or may come into being or appear. All right? And that's what evenio means. Ex venio. Ex out of venio, to come. Okay? So ex venio or evenio, to come out of something, to happen, a happening. Is another way to describe it. An event is a happening, something that happens. Something that could happen. Okay? In the event that there's a snowstorm, doesn't mean it's happened. It's a happening. It could happen. It's a could happening. But did you go to the event? Which means it has happened. Something that did happen, actually. Not something that might have happened. It happened. You went to the event. But in the event that it snows or snowed, the event might have been canceled. See? No. Using it in two different ways. Just to blow your mind, Miss Bolton. Okay. The Pentateuch was written after the exile, basically. Okay? It was formed before the exile, but basically, let's cut to the chase. The 5 books of the Pentateuch came to their final shape, maybe during the exile, but certainly after the exile, which we know ended in 539 BC. So sometime after 539, like in the 400s BC, is when the Pentateuch was brought together. Okay, all sorts of stories, okay, were collected at some time. Stories of the origins of the Jewish people, of the world, really, I should say. Stories of the origin of the world, of the nations, the various peoples on earth, of the Jews specifically, through their patriarchs. The patriarchs' experience of God. Certainly the story of the Exodus from Egypt. That's a big one. And the giving of the law from their God. Okay, all these stories eventually get written down. And scholars think that probably the actual start of this kind of process was during the reign of David the king around 1000 BC. Why? I'm going to tell you, Ms. Wenrick, a lot of this is guesswork. All right? Because I wasn't there, and these biblical scholars, no matter how esteemed they are, they were not there. And so a lot of this is like supposing.
I think they're challenging,
Oh, they are. Yeah. Challenge.
but just never turns into anything like it's like put down. I feel like
Well, if they're careful scholars, which they mostly are, I would say. I don't want to be totally negative, but then they will admit and say in their work, this is tentative. This, we don't know for sure. But they'll give let's give them the reasons why we think this is the case. But you are right, because I've studied political studies as a graduate student and as a PhD student, and yeah, you're dealing with PhDs, people who think they know everything, including myself. And it sometimes can be hard to, I don't know, maybe put away the ego, I think, and accept challenges. Like for someone to say, well, why? Because they've gone through all the arguments. They have wrestled with it themselves, and it's clear to them. So when someone shows up, it's not clear for. A lot of times people get stressed out. Like now I have to. It's like trying to explain how to use Roku to my mother. Like for the 15th time after I've shown her. Just show me how to do it. Mom, I've shown you 15 times. You don't remember, And so, I've had professors that were just not very helpful when I asked questions. So they know and also it's one of these things where when you're amongst friends, you'll say things that you won't say out to outsiders. So they want to make it seem like, oh, there are no real problems. We all kind of know this is how the Bible developed, and this is what people think and stuff. And they don't tell you maybe that there are other people who disagree with them and stuff. But if they're talking to friends, they want you to trust them, and they want also there's an agenda. They want you to accept what they're trying to tell you. But amongst friends, they might say, well, yeah, there's some real problems with this hypothesis. And it was wondered, it happened with everything. I think you know this, or you will find yourself. I'm not going to say anything more because I don't want to preach about other things that I'm not competent on. But always have a questioning mind, no matter what it is. Don't let them tell you that you can't ask a question. Because if they don't let you ask a question, or they don't want to answer the question, let's keep this in the context of religion. Because a lot of time, you go to a priest or someone and you ask questions, or you're in Sunday school, and maybe you've had the experience where the person kind of shuts you down. At some point they're just like, okay, we got to move on. You can't say, just this is the church teaches this, and that's okay, fine. And maybe sometimes you don't have time to. But other times I think it's the problem when the person's himself or herself not really deepen their own knowledge or faith. I'm not judging them. I'm not saying they're bad people. Just that they might be also afraid about the question you're asking because they haven't really addressed it. Maybe raising questions and doubts for them, and so let's just move on. Or you're just a nobody. Who the heck are you to question what PhDs have decided? This is the other attitude I got in graduate school. You're just a graduate student. Who are you to question? Who are you? That's kind of it. But anyways, so I'm going to tell you what they think. But just remember, this is theory. It could be wrong. They do a lot of the evidence is based on things that people read from the Bible. Okay. And they could be right. I'm not saying they're wrong, all right? But this is the theory. The idea is, or the assumption is, that once the Jews, like any society, established a government, they had a monarchy, they had settled society, there was cities and villages, there weren't nomads moving around, that gave the conditions for writing to a people. And a lot of, even when we talked early in the course about God bless you, the history of writing. Other scholars think this too with writing, that they attach writing with civilization, the appearance of civilization. Because that seems to be when writing, maybe it's not invented with civilization, maybe it's there before in some fashion, but it flourishes with a civilization. You have established communities, educational systems that can teach people how to write and read. You need to keep records. Okay, that's probably one of the main reasons writing came into play, was not just to draw pictures of, hey, we went on a hunt, so I want to tell you a story about our hunt. It was, I'm selling 50 sheep to Shlomo, and I need written down proof that I gave him 50 sheep. So, I can prove, that, and he gets proof that I paid him, or he paid me. That's probably where it comes from. So, okay, that's the assumption. And it's not just shared by biblical scholars. Other people, anthropologists, archaeologists, see this in other civilizations, writing, emergence of writing. So probably during the monarchy, when there was a settled society, they had kind of a government, they needed to keep records. That's probably when they started writing these stories down, around 1000 BC with the kingdom of David. Whoops. The earliest, so you have histories of the kings of Israel. You would have songs that were used in their worship in the temple that David's son Solomon built. Okay, various laws for worship in the temple would probably need to be written down so that the priests would know what they were supposed to do and people would know what it's supposed to do. Okay, so probably that's the assumption. And so the earliest level which arises, the earliest level of the Pentateuch, which seems to arise probably around this time, 1000 to the 900s, the Davidic monarchy, in the southern kingdom, in the south, in Judah, is what's called the Yahwist source. The Yahwist. Why is he called the Yahwist? If it is a he, Well, I'll tell you in a minute. Well, I'll tell you right now. First of all, because he is known for this is something where you can start this is a detail, a datum, piece of evidence where you can kind of see the different sources that have been melded together in the Pentateuch and in the Bible. The name of God. When was the name of God revealed to humanity? Okay, for the Yahwist, the earliest of these sources, the name of God, Yahweh. I think I spoke about before. Yes, Yahweh. Whoops. Oh, why is it doing that? I turned it off. You saw me, Mr. Marita, in the last class. For the Yahwist, Yahweh's name is always known to humanity from the creation of the world. And so in the stories which scholars ascribe to this source, the personal name of God, Yahweh, is used from the time of Adam and Eve, from the first humans. He's always known as Yahweh. His personal name is known. Hence, the Yahwist. Okay? He's known as the Yahwist because he always calls God by Yahweh, the name Yahweh. Also known as J, Y, because, not Y, W-H-Y. Why or wherefore do we call him J? Because the early scholars, and a lot of the early biblical scholars were Germans, and J is pronounced as a Y in German, so they spell Yahweh with a J, so the Yahweh. Okay, so he's known as J, but he's the Yahweh, right? So always Yahweh, and once we can start to pick out the stories that come from this source, we can also notice some other things that distinguish it. For example, the descriptions of God by the Yahwist are very anthropomorphic. Okay, God is presented almost as a man or a human being, just a very powerful man. Anthropos means human being. Morphe means a form. Okay, so in the form of a man. So when it's, for example, God walks around the Garden of Eden. He's described as walking through the garden. God takes a stroll through the garden every day in the afternoon. God gets angry. He seems to have emotions, so he gets angry. He regrets actions that he's done. He attacks Moses, remember, because Moses is not circumcised. These all come from the Yahwist. And this also tells us further something about the Yahwist, that the Yahwist is very vivid and earthy is oftentimes the word used in his descriptions of God and of the stories. So he gives us a lot of interesting little details that make the stories fun, fascinating, and stuff like that. So, when Noah goes into his ark, God is nice enough to close the door for Noah after Noah. I don't know, he's just a gentleman, I guess. So, I was like, here, Noah, let me close the door for you, or it could be like, get the hell in there, Noah, it's raining, boom, Or when, Sodom and Gomorrah, the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah are going to be destroyed, God sends angels to save this guy Lot. Don't worry about who he is, but goes to save him. And Lot, it's funny that the always tells it a very funny way. Lot's like an ignoramus. He's like, should I go? Lot, God's just about to destroy the cities. He's going to rain down fire from heaven and destroy this. But I don't know if I want to go. My family's here. And finally, the angels just grab him they grab him and drag him and say, Lot, come with us. And they drag him. So it's very vivid, because they just get pissed off with Lot because he's indecisive, even though he could die. So earthy. And the name of the mountain where God reveals his law to Moses is called Mount Sinai by the Yahwist. Mount Sinai. All right. Why does that matter? Well, you'll see in a moment. Okay? See in a moment. Stick with me. As we know, the United Kingdom did not last, and the northern tribes separated. Most of the tribes of Israel, like 9 of them, separated from some of the southern tribes, and they established their own kingdom with their own king and their own temple in the north. Okay? Well, they had stories too. They were Jews. They had stories that they told about the patriarchs and God. And so, they write their stories down as well, probably sometime in the 800s, when their kingdom is established and they have a king, scholars think. So We have another source of stories that come into the Pentateuch, into the Bible, from the source from the northern kingdom, who is called the Elohist by scholars, or E. So the Elohist, the characteristics of the Elohist, in comparison to the Yahwist from Judah, from the southern kingdom. And I should say that you can also tell by the foci, which is the plural of focus. I'm never going to say focuses. Okay, it's foci for me. And a lot of good battery.
You could try.
The foci for the Yahwist is Judah. A lot of the stories are set in the south. And a dead giveaway for the Elohist, that it comes from the north, is that there's a lot of focus on stories from the north, the northern part of Israel. Okay. So what's the difference? Well, for the first thing is the name of God. When is God's name revealed? And for the Elohist, the name Yahweh is not revealed until Moses. God reveals his name as Yahweh, his personal name, only to Moses, not before. So how does the Elohist refer to God then if he doesn't use the personal name of God? He calls him God, basically. Elohim, the God, just plural, the gods, but always with a singular verb. So he means it in the singular. It's just a plural of majesty, the God of gods. So from, the earliest, Abraham knows this God is Elohim. Isaac, Jacob, is Elohim in the stories. No name yet. Or no personal name, I shouldn't. He's just known as simple God. And then when Moses comes about in the burning bush, God said, Moses says, well, tell me your name. And he says, I am Yahweh. That's my name. So that's when the Elohist does it. The Elohist is also less anthropomorphic than the Yahwist. He doesn't, the author or whatever, the source, does not describe God as just this more powerful being than humans. The Elohist is more abstract about God, more non-concrete. Okay, and also because of that fact, God is described as more remote from his creation. In the Yahwist, God's in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve walking around. God would remember the lecture from what's her name, Karen Armstrong, when she talks about the book of Genesis, right? And the whole first part, which is mostly the Yahwist, God's everywhere, right? God's involved in everything, okay? And then he disappears. Well, it's probably because it's the Elohist source. God is more remote in the Elohist. He works through prophets. He sends intermediaries, dreams. He uses dreams and stuff like that, prophets, people to speak for him. So Moses is described as a prophet, an intermediary. Stuff like that. That's the Elohist speaking. And his style is not as vivid as the Yahwist. It's not as, engaging and interesting as the Yahwist. Okay, that's just a thing about his style. And finally, another dead giveaway is that the name for the mountain on which Moses and the Jews received the law, it's not Sinai for the Elohist. He knows it as Horeb. Horeb. Also, the Yahwist and the Elohist, I don't put this on here because I don't think it's a huge difference, but the names, for some reason, I don't know why, the names for Moses' father-in-law, Moses marries this woman, Zipporah, who's a non-Jew, by the way. She's a Midianite. Interesting. So are Moses' children Jews, Ms. Jacoby? According to later Jewish law, no. But anyways, he marries this Midianite woman, Zipporah, and her father is called Ruel, Jethro, and Hobab. He's got like 3 different names. And we don't know why. We just know that the Yahwist, I think, prefers Ruel, and the Elohist, I think, prefers Jethro or something. Anyways, but anyways, they have different names. So that's another dead giveaway of who the source is. They prefer these different names. Okay, so the Elohist is the kind of like the saga, the national epic of the northern tribes, our stories. Well, from the history, we remember that, the northern tribes do. Sorry about that, sir. I didn't mean to. Okay, good. I don't want to get sued or fired. Um, remember, the kingdom of Israel is destroyed in 721, yeah? By the Assyrians. Okay, so what happens to all the tribes that were there? Well, I told you, we don't know where they went. They went wherever, okay? But the assumption is, Ms. Lenrick, the theory, no one was there, so we don't know. We don't have any direct archaeological evidence like describing this, but the assumption is that a lot of people from the north would have fled down to south to be with their fellow Jews. This would have been also included priests from the Israelite temple that was in Samaria or up in the north, who would bring their traditions and their worship and their stories down to the south, and that these two sources, the J and the E source, would then get amalgamated together, unified. Actually, what scholars think is that the Elohist was just supplemented, that the J source was already kind of a source. It was a ready-made fashioned book, you might say, or a series of stories that had been organized. And then the northern stories were then just inserted later on, okay, into the story of the Yahwist. All right, so that's the theory. So now we have a JE source. We have J, we have E, which are separate from each other for a while, but then with the destruction of the north and possibly the refugees going down to the south, they brought their stories, and then they were put into the other story of J. So they have a larger story of JE. And so that would comprise, I'll get to Deuteronomist in a minute, that would, if we're looking at the development of the Pentateuch now, the core texts, if you're interested, essentially if you take Genesis chapter 2 to Exodus 19, so you go from Genesis chapter 2 in your Bible all the way to Exodus chapter 19, all right? And then you skip over Leviticus, because that comes later, and then you go straight to Numbers, the book of Numbers. And even in the book of Numbers, if you only keep the narratives, the stories, and you cut out all the legal stuff, the laws that are given in the desert in the book of Numbers, because those are later, then there's probably what scholars believe to be the core, if you're looking for the original Pentateuch, the original story that we have with J and E, that's probably a good representation of what it was. It was a story from from Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and it ended with the death of Moses, okay, as the Jews are preparing to enter into the promised land, and Moses dies, okay, before that happens. All right? That's probably the basic story. But more stuff is added. Okay, because if we remember, the southern kingdom was also invaded and destroyed. Okay, in the 500s. But one of the things that the northerners also brought with them, this is why the dates are 700 to 500. One of the other things that they brought with them, in addition to the Elohist, was this something called the second book of the law, or another copy of the law, Deuteros Nomos. I think I already told you this, the Greek. Deuteros means second in Greek. And nomos, like our word norm, means a law, right? And that's exactly what it is. It's a repeat of other laws that are found earlier, which actually are inserted later. So this seems to be a law code that was brought down from the north, and scholars guess was placed in the temple, the Jerusalem temple, and then just forgotten. They forgot they had it. So it comes from the north originally. This law book called the Second Law, or the copy of the Law of Deuteronomy, the book of Deuteronomy we're talking about now, basically. And then it gets found again. Okay. Wait a second. Yeah, because we have the story of it in the not in the Pentateuch, but in the second book of Kings. All right. If you look, it's not here on the. Let me write it here. Chapter whatchamacallit? Chapter 22. If you go to the second book of Kings, chapter 22. The king at the time is a man named Josiah, and they're renovating the Jerusalem temple. And in the process of renovating, tearing stuff down, you've seen renovation shows, right? Windy City Rehab, yeah. Or is that just like old people shows? Because I'm an old person. No. Tearing stuff down, building stuff up. And in the process, they rediscover this book, this code of the law. They find a scroll. But they didn't know what it was, apparently. And the priest overseeing the renovations looks at it and realizes its importance and brings it to Josiah the king, and he reads it for him. And Josiah the king freaks out because this is a book from Moses, so it's very important, with all these laws that they were supposed to be following, all these rules that they weren't following. And Josiah is really worried because this was like a contract with their God Yahweh, and if they haven't been following all the rules that they were supposed to, then Yahweh must be really pissed, like really enraged with them. Which might explain some of the things that had happened, like the destruction of the northern kingdom, the constant attacks from outside on the kingdom of Judah from other empires. So he's really worried. He's like, okay, and he sends the priest to a prophetess whose husband works at the temple, but she's a prophetess. She's known as a prophet, Huldah. Women were prophets too. They weren't just men prophets. And let me read it to you. It's interesting. You want to follow along, 2 Kings 22. I'm at verse 15. You got it? Okay. Verse 15. So they go to Huldah the prophet, and Huldah says to them, the representatives, "Thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel. Say to the man who sent you to me, thus says Yahweh." Okay? And that's meant to be repetitive. That's how the prophets speak. They're messengers. So you have to repeat who told you, who's sending you, in whose name you're saying the message, and then you introduce the message by saying, okay, so-and-so told me to tell you this. Thus says the Lord. I'm about to bring evil upon this place and upon its inhabitants, all the words of the book which the king of Judah has read, because they have abandoned me and have burned incense to other gods, provoking me by all the works of their hands. My rage is ablaze against this place, probably meaning the sanctuary, the temple, and it cannot be extinguished. Okay, so he's going to punish Israel or Judah. There's just nothing around that. But she does say that, don't worry, Josiah, you'll die in peace. So you won't have to see this happen. But destruction will happen as punishment because you didn't follow the law that you agreed to. All right. So what does Josiah do with? So what did I want to say? I'm missing something. So what does Josiah do? And we're not going to read all of chapter 23, but if you want to see, go to chapter 23, and it talks about the religious reform that Josiah did. Josiah didn't just throw his hands up in the air and say, okay, well, we're going to be destroyed anyways. Who cares? We'll just keep doing what we've been doing. No, he said we have to start following. God is going to judge us justly. We deserve to be punished. So that's non-negotiable. Yahweh has spoken through his prophet, his prophetess. But we now need to change. Okay, so we need to start doing everything that is written in this law book, and that includes, for example, just to read you some things. Then the king. Then the king commanded the high priest Hilkiah, who was the one who found the law, and the doorkeepers of the temple to remove from the temple of Yahweh all the objects that had been made for Baal, okay, one of the local Canaanite gods, Asherah, a female god, a goddess, and the whole host of heaven. So the angels, various spirits in the sky. Okay, he put an end to the idolatrous priests whom the kings of Judah had appointed to burn incense on the hilltops in the cities of Judah and in Jerusalem, and also those who burned incense, perfume, like resin from a tree that was perfume. It smells. It's an act of worship. They burned this to Baal. They burned it to the sun, the moon, the signs of the zodiac, meaning the planets and the stars, and to all the angels. He also removed the Asherah, which was an idol of a goddess, and he burned it and crushed it and scattered its dust over the graveyard of the people of the land. He tore down the apartments, the houses of the cult prostitutes. Okay, that was part of worship in a lot of ancient religions, especially this area of the world. One of the ways that you worshiped the god when you went to a temple or a shrine was you had sex with a prostitute there, who was, a virgin, as they say. They were always virgins, but they had a lot of sex of the god, male and female, because it was considered that the sexual release, the orgasm, was like connecting you with the spirit of the divinity. They were having sex with the god in a way through the prostitute. Okay. So they had these in the Jerusalem temple. Apparently, they had their houses, and I guess people were having sex. They thought they were having sex with Yahweh through these prostitutes or Baal or something. But he tore down their houses and got rid of them. What else? Oh, he does other things. Oh, the king also defiled Topheth, this place in the valley of Ben Hinnom, so that there would no longer be any immolation of sons or daughters by fire in honor of Molech. Okay, Molech was the god of, I think, the Ammonites, or one of the local gods of Canaanite gods, and people would sacrifice their children, their firstborn children, to him. So, which you might say, well, how would Aaron do that? But it makes sense because you want fertility for your wife. So what's the trade-off? You sacrifice your firstborn to the god, and then the god gives you plenty of more children. The trade-off is that you don't do it, and your wife is sterile, possibly. You have no children. So the Jews were doing this. They were sacrificing to this pagan god Molech, sacrificing their children. So he destroys that. He destroyed in the entrance to the house of the Lord, meaning the temple, near the chamber of Nathan Melech, the official. This will be important, Nathan Melech, which was a large building. He destroys by fire the chariots of the sun. Okay, these were chariots in honor of the sun god that Solomon had put there, David's son. And he demolished the altars made by the kings of Judah on the roof, meaning like on the roof terraces of the temple. They had altars to other gods, etc., etc., etc. This goes through long. Now the kicker is in verse 21, Mr. Kevin. Josiah issued a command to all the people: observe the Passover of Yahweh, your God, as it is written in this book of the covenant. And the writer tells us, no Passover such as this had been observed during the period when the judges ruled Israel, or during the entire period of the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah, until the 18th year of King Josiah, when this Passover of Yahweh was kept. What does that tell you? What does that tell you, Mr. Lee? Nothing like this Passover was celebrated since the time that the Jews entered the land of Canaan until Josiah. What does that tell you? What was going on with the Passover? The major feast of the Jews, right? Every year, the Passover. The Jews celebrate the Passover, right? Supposed to have the Passover. Their big holiday, right? What does it tell you, Mr. Neil, about the Jews this time? You don't know? Okay. Does anyone want to hazard a guess? You did.
Like they celebrated something.
They celebrated Hanukkah.
What was the last name?
The Passover of the Lord, or Josiah.
Just
Well, Josiah is their king, so they're not celebrating Josiah during Passover. The Passover is to celebrate their liberation from slavery in Egypt, which God tells them they have to celebrate every year as a memorial to remember what God did for them. Were they doing it themselves? Have they been doing it? Well, what did he say? No Passover had been observed for the time that the Jews entered into the land from Egypt, churches, during the entire period of the kings both of Israel and Judah until Josiah. So does that mean King David celebrated it? The great king? Not. Solomon? Not. Listen.
Blasphemy.
What be blasphemy?
They're not celebrating it, even though God told them. So,
Well, yeah. Why do you think God's going to destroy them? Olga says, God's sorry, you're going to be destroyed regardless. Yeah. Yeah, they didn't keep it. So Josiah's like, we now have to keep it every year. Because weren't doing it. Remember when I told you about circumcision of Moses? Why wasn't Moses a Jew circumcised? Didn't God tell the Jews, you have to circumcise your sons? Don't Jews do that today? You have to if you're a faithful Jew. Huh?
I thought everyone gets it.
Not you true. Not you true. Huh?
I know what we've done.
Okay, no, that's fine.
No, I'm saying, yeah, I thought it was.
Yeah, no, only Jewish men. Only Jewish men. The foreskin of the beast. Last I checked. Well, who knows these days? I don't know. I don't know. Black is white, up and down. All I'm gonna say. Anyway. But yeah. Moses wasn't circumcised apparently. Apparently the Jews were not observing the major holiday of the year, Passover, until this time. And it's funny because the story is retold in the second book of Chronicles by a later writer. Okay, the books of Chronicles kind of repeat the books of Kings. And in the second book of Chronicles, the writer seems to have a problem with this because the way he tells the story, first of all, he doesn't go into all about the gods that were in the temple and stuff like that. Really want to go into that they had all these pagan gods that were worshiping in the temple prostitutes, doesn't want to mention that, and does mention the Passover, but he kind of reinterprets it like, not that they weren't celebrating the Passover, but that Josiah just had a really big feast, it was a big celebration. That's what he means by nobody had celebrated it like Josiah, rather than what the author here in 2 Kings seems to mean, which is no Passover at all was being celebrated until Josiah brought it back. We weren't following the law that God gave us. The chronicler who wrote 2 Chronicles is like, well, just means that they didn't do it with the kind of oomph or the gusto that Josiah did, Yeah, okay. So we have Deuteronomy, the second book, called D, comes from the north, goes to the south, and somewhere between 700 and 500 BC is when it was composed, they think. And this is apparently the law code that's described as found in the temple, they think. And it is a law code. It's a bunch of laws. A lot, it repeats a lot of later laws that we'll find. The essential law code scholars think they can identify as chapters 12 to 28. I think that's the essential law code that was probably found in the temple. And that's what it's talking about. And what are the characteristics of Deuteronomy? Well, pretty simple. One God, one temple, one king. Okay, so the oneness. There's a unity of God, worship of the one God Yahweh. There's only one place to worship that God, one temple, and there's one king, which is interesting because if this comes from the north, it's kind of like the northerners were kind of like more traditional than the southerners because if you read the stories that in the Bible, Mr. Kettner, Mr. Plange, everybody else, Mr. Kazin, if you read the stories that, like the southern stories that they tell about the north, the northerners are the ones who have fallen away and they're worshiping God on all these hills and stuff like that. And, they're the ones who have kind of corrupted, but, the Deuteronomy is clear. There's one God and one place you worship God, one mountain, and there's one king of the Jews. What's interesting about the one temple, though, is that Deuteronomy never says where it is. It doesn't say it's in Jerusalem. Now, Jews today, when they read this Deuteronomy, they read back into it Jerusalem, the Judahites. Okay, they change this. The author, the original author of the code, because it comes from the north, probably meant Mount Gerizim, where the northerners were worshiping in their temple. And that's what Samaritans believe. They believe that the Jews changed this to make it refer to Jerusalem. Probably right. The original document probably was referring to the northern temple, northern place of worship. But Deuteronomy shows you God is the author, also scripture. There's the literal meaning of what probably the original author meant. May have meant Mount Gerizim, probably. God had other plans. He was putting his eggs all in the basket of Judah. Okay? Not necessarily the northern kingdom, but Judah. And so the temple of Jerusalem will become important because that's the temple site of Judah and not of the north. So anyway, so it gets reinterpreted, but it never actually says which temple. It's just one place where my name will be honored is basically what it said, what God says, but doesn't specify. All right, interesting. Okay. And 4, the message of the Deuteronomist is obedience equals blessing, and disobedience means a curse. If you are faithful to God, he will bless you and bless the land, as he promised Abraham. I'll give you the land, and I'll give you many children. But if you're unfaithful, God will take those away. You'll be invaded and destroyed. Your children will be killed before your eyes. He will punish you if you disobey these laws. And that kind of completes, adds on to the J and E source. The Deuteronomist adds on this second law once it's found. But what about all the other stuff? Well, remember, the Judah itself is destroyed in 587. Okay, so what now happens to, you got J-E and you've got D in Judah, okay, but now the kingdom of Judah is destroyed. The Jews go into exile. Well, what happens then? Well, now we see the arrival of the priestly source. And the theory behind this, the assumption behind this is that because the Jerusalem temple is destroyed and all the Jews, including the priests of the temple, are thrown into exile, well, now they want to write their stuff down, the priests especially. They want to collect the law, their ritual laws. They want to collect the stories of the patriarchs and where they came from, like they're very focused on genealogies and family trees. And they also want to organize the previous corpus, body of writings, to save it as they're going through the exile. That's what they think happened. And so now we have what's called P, or the priestly source, sometime during the exile, but also after post 539, as I told you, after the exile, so sometime between 500s to 400s. And how can we identify the priestly source? Well, Mr. Plains, you asked, and I answer, kind of like dominoes, you need an emergency pizza, and I come out of the wall. I work too hard for you, Mr. Plains. See, Mr. Marita, see how he treats me? Divine transcendence, okay? If God is remote, we see the development of God here. Maybe from the influence of the Deuteronomist, okay? But as the Jews reflect about their relationship and the fact that they were worshiping other gods, and in addition to this God Yahweh, they realize that Yahweh is the only God, and they should have only been worshiping him. So he's not a man, he's not like a human being. So for the priestly authors, God is completely transcendent. What am I doing to this? And that leads to monotheism. Remember, I told you the two things about the Jews, the two main ideas are there's one God, and they are the chosen people by this God. So monotheism is now impressed back on the earlier writings, which were not necessarily monotheistic, as we know. They admit it in the Bible. They don't try to cover it up. It was there. But it wasn't really the truth. And so, for example, there was the creation story of Adam and Eve. That was the original creation story. But, that's by the Yahwist, and it's a little bit too anthropomorphic. It doesn't really tell maybe the whole truth about God. So the priestly authors wrote Genesis 1. In the beginning, God, simply God, again, because his name has not been revealed. The priestly author agrees with the Elohist that God, Yahweh, was not revealed until Moses. So the priestly author always refers to Elohim or God Most High or something like that. So God creates by his word, okay? No activity, He doesn't plant a garden, okay, like with the Yahwist and water it and stuff like that and walk around it, during the day. No, God is remote. He's transcendent. He is the creator for the priestly authors. The priestly authors are also very focused on law and ritual. So whenever you have ritual laws, they add these into the story to say, okay, even though they probably weren't given at the time to Moses, but they act like, yeah, Moses was told exactly how to build the temple already on Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb, and they are very interested in covenants and genealogies, and they insert these ideas into the story, the ancient stories, as a way to organize them. You see this especially in the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis is very organized according to family trees, who came from whom, all right? And that's why sometimes you see repetition of family trees, because you might have an older tradition of a genealogy, and then the priestly tradition is added later. And covenants. Let's get to the covenant before I forget. Okay, you can look at this more on your own if you're curious. This is just something someone did, thankfully, showing you color-coding the various sources. The dates are approximate. Okay, go with my dates, but the dates are approximate. But you can see where these authors were active, okay? So we see that, the large chunk here is in Genesis and Exodus. And then we had the Elohist over here in Numbers, where they're in the desert with Moses, and Moses dies. So these are the core, and then you can see where additions are made. Deuteronomy is added on, apparently. But then the priestly author, the blue, is where, like, whole book of Leviticus, the whole end almost of Exodus, are a whole bunch of laws about worship and stuff. Inserts all sorts of laws in the book of Numbers. And really doesn't do much with the ancient stories in Genesis other than organizing them with the genealogies, but does add, as I said, the creation story at the very beginning. So that's actually, with the creation story, you're actually reading one of the last products of the Pentateuch, the latest parts. And the idea is the covenant, okay? That's the idea of the Pentateuch. God has made an agreement, a contract with the people of Israel, the sons and daughters of Jacob, to be their God, and they are to follow him faithfully. It's a relationship. So we get back to the beginning, encountering sacred writings. In these writings, the writings are describing their encounter with their God, and then through the writings themselves, because we couldn't be there, but we're encountering that encounter that they're writing about. And in some way, we're encountering God too. So there's only one God, monotheism, This is where they eventually arrive at, especially with the priestly, and the Jews. We're his special people that he has chosen, that he has elected to bring this message to the world. It's not just for them, but also to be a witness to the world that there is this one God who loves all humanity, not just the Jewish people, but in a special way the Jewish people. And of course, the Jewish people are important for Christians because from them comes the Messiah and salvation. Right? And that's what Jesus says. Salvation is from the Jews. So I'll end on that. God bless you all. My pleasure to teach you. I hope you've enjoyed the class. Thank you for registering and sticking with it. And that's it. Well, I shouldn't say that's it. We have a test and other things. Don't forget the evaluations, please.
See you around.
See you around, Mr. Plange. God bless you. It's McGowan. Welcome, sir. Oh, really? For what? World religions or Christian faith?
Yeah.
Ooh, that'll be fun, Ms. A lot of information, Ms. Donnelly. Ms. Maria. You're welcome. Bye, ladies. Have a good day. You're welcome. You too. God bless you. This is the last one. God bless you, Ms. Donnelly. You too.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm not going to have you again. Come on, do world religions. Yeah, so do world religions. It's different.
I think I already have enough credits to.
And I know you have to pay for it, so it's extra money you're going to be paying back. But all right.
Maybe
well,
I will.
Okay.
Well,
See you, Mr. Kazing. God bless you.
So change the time, so the final is that? That's fine, the final multiple days like the other ones, or is that only on the day?
No, it's the whole week, the whole exam. Yeah.
I have another class that, did similar things, where they have the test for the week, but also for the final exam, it's on a set date.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make
No
sure
set
that
date.
ours is also.
Yeah. Choose when you want to do it during the week. Okay. You can say just make sure you're calm.
No, yeah,
Everything
I just wanted to make sure because.
Okay.
Just since it's online and we don't have a set time, per se, in here, it didn't coincide with.
Okie dokie.
Just want to make sure, take care, have a great, rest of your.
You too, sir. Thank you very much. It's like dangerous. Mom, it's the sun is out. The sun is out. It's not dangerous. McGowan. Is McGowan late? No, because I was still standing outside. I think Ms. Winrick was fine. Mr. Plange was fine. I was standing outside, so. So, Bolton, Ms. Donnelly, Kobias, Kettner, Gowan, Marita, O'Neill. Did O'Neill do anything? He answered a question. Belts did, yeah, that's Ms. Belts. Plain G, well, he interacted with me, and so she did too. Swap?